Well, Tennessee stays perfect on the season, moving to 5-0 behind an 89-60 win over Tennessee State. And from the immediate reaction I had, it was a pretty outing by Tennessee. But when we get to the critical eye of Rick Barnes, it's not so pretty. And what I can gather is it's the lack of consistency within this team. And that's not a unique downside to Rick Barnes' Volunteers team. I mean, the Lady Vols certainly struggle with consistency, and they get a nice win over MTSU tonight on the road as the Tennessee Volunteers are here inside the Food City Center. And where it started pretty for Tennessee was Amari Abram taking advantage of his second straight start for the Orange and White, and he did so by knocking down 3 straight triple tries, giving Tennessee 9 of its first 13 points on the outing. And what was impressive about that hot start for Amari Abram was the variety of shots that he had. One, it was deep catch and shoot. Another was off a flare screen, and another was him running baseline to the other corner to knock down another triple try. And what we saw in that small sample size of the first few minutes of the game was when he gets his feet set, when Amari Abram takes good shots because he's a great shooter, he knocks them down easily. Rick Barnes drives the message home every week that if you go out there and you execute on the details, you'll get all the shots that you want. But of course, after Amari Abram knocks down his third straight triple, the next one wasn't necessarily a good look, and then we didn't see much offensive scoring from him the rest of the outing. And what I asked Amari Abram after the game about what allowed him to have that fast start was, of course, giving credit to his teammates, but he says he actually works a lot on rhythm shooting. And you could see in the beginning of this game that he was in rhythm, knocking down those 3 very different triple tries. And having somebody that can give Tennessee a perimeter presence like that will be huge when they get ready for the Players Era Men's Championship in Las Vegas coming up next week. But what ends up being ugly, I guess, about this game, and maybe that's too aggressive, but it's the lack of consistency. They start so well when it comes to their attention to detail and their defensive assignments. When it comes to how they're passing on offense, it looks clean, it looks sound in their fundamentals. And we had a post-game recap on the website, fulldisclosurepro.com, really highlighting that. But where it gets ugly and where it gets away from them is when they're no longer paying attention to the details. And that just comes down to I'll want to. I mean, the Lady Vols do that just as well. They'll do just enough to preserve a win or push late in the game to get a sizable win. And sometimes I find Tennessee does that same thing where they oftentimes do just enough and then they don't do just enough times at a consistent rate. And that's how you get to 17 turnovers for Tennessee. And a number of them come off of bad passing. A number of them come off not recognizing going up against, 4 or 5 guards and, a team studying your film and knowing that you want to, get that defensive board and then get out in space and kind of just get a fast break layup. And they crowd down in the post and there's nowhere for them to go, so they try to kick it back out. But, Rick Barnes, when I asked him about it, he highlighted 2 plays. One that probably stuck out to him in the worst way. For Nate Ahmet, he has the ball down by his legs, and that's a turnover. Felix Akpara, who's the tallest guy on the court, he ends up trying to throw the ball down to the post and doesn't see his defender put his hands up, and it's a deflection. And when you're the tallest guy on the floor, that certainly should not be something that is happening, and a lot of that has to come down to mindset. Rick Barnes was point blank period. Has nothing to do with the fact that JP Estrella is not out on the court, which he says is a bone bruise, could be about a couple of weeks before he returns, and it comes down to his comfort level as well. But it's not because JP Estrella is not out on the court that they're now kind of struggling with the offensive and defensive rebounding. It's a mindset. It's a 1-2. In my sit-down interview with Felix Akpara, which is back on the homepage, he talked about how being better on the glass is something that he's really focusing in on this season because it comes down to effort, regardless of the size that Tennessee has played this season, most of which have been smaller than Tennessee. They struggle to find consistency with their rebounding efforts. And again, comes down to that consistency, that 1-2, that mindset. Same thing with turnovers. Dwayne Brown said that it's unacceptable that they have so many turnovers. I asked him, how are you going to limit the up and downs that we see within these games where you have this tight attention to detail and then other moments you just kind of are, down. You're not paying attention. And he says, actually in practice, when we're not rebounding the way that we should, we have to run in practice. There are consequences to not rebounding in practice. So what becomes frustrating is what they do in practice. It's not translating as much out onto the court. And Rick Barnes says that they're going to be in some big trouble if they can't turn it up a notch, getting ready to go out to Las Vegas. In fact, I think it's Houston who averages about 13 forced turnovers a game. Yeah, it's Houston. Granted, that's in the low 100s, early 200s in the NCAA rankings, but when Tennessee has 17 turnovers tonight, that certainly is something that leaves Houston a little bit of wiggle room. Of course, they meet Rutgers first, but a quick turnaround for Tennessee where they've got to figure out, how much they want it and can they want it for 2 halves. Once they can get together for 2 halves, this will be a very special team. They have the appropriate depth that you want. You have enough big men to handle business down in the post. You're finding some offensive rhythm from the perimeter with guys like Amari Abram. Hopefully Ethan Berg can have a better game moving forward. He had a ton of untimely turnovers and just bad passes, and just Rick Barnes really laid into him today. He needs more of an outing like he had against Rice. If Amari Abram and Ethan Berg can get on the same page of when they want to show up in these games, they'll give Tennessee the offense that they need. And then Jacoby Gillespie and Felix Akpara have to find that rhythm. They tried to get the lob tonight and wasn't really working with that duo. So certainly some things to focus on, especially if we look at it through the critical eye of Rick Barnes. But we'll have so much more coming up on Tennessee Athletics. Of course, a live ball with myself and VFL Todd Kelly Jr. Friday morning, just a few hours, previewing the Tennessee and Florida Gators matchup. You don't want to miss it. Join us here on YouTube or any of the social media platforms. I'll talk to you guys in the morning.